history on this one yet.
Yeah, that works because I'm having some signals typing.
Hey there, Mr. Harper. Hey, how's it going?
John, how are you?
Good. Sitting right here. Perfect.
You use your help
Mr. Hargrove is
right now. You're
actually Dr.
I tried that. It's not working. They're not listening.
Can you please?
I'm enlisting some help from Mayor Cook here, so if we could get everybody to please take their seats. Okay. It's my pleasure now to introduce our third conversation of the afternoon. Thank you all for your participation so far. As with the last panel, I'll begin by introducing our participants from your right to left. First, we have Dr. Kathleen Stout, professor in the Department of Political Science here at UTEP. Next to her, we have Dr. William Hargrove, who's the director for the Center for Environmental Resource Management, or CERM, here at UTEP. And then we have Jesse Herford, who's the president of the Border Trade Alliance. Already today we've had several references to the Border Plex Alliance and the work they're doing, so we're very happy today to have the CEO of the Border Plex Alliance, Rolando Pablos, joining us today. And our moderator for this conversation, which as you can see is titled "What Can North America Learn from the Border?" is Dr. Richard Pineda, the director of the Sam Donaldson Center for Communication Studies here at UTEP. Dr. Pineda?
I'll let the applause go because I like applause, so that helps. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for this afternoon's session, What Can North America Learn from the Border? In thinking about the questions for our panelists and thinking about the position not only of the conference, but the way that we think about the border, in some ways I think that all of the panelists, as many of you agree, the border serves as a microcosm for global engagement and for global affairs. Largely what transpires here on the border, whether that is by design or by default, holds promise and peril for global affairs. And with that in mind and with that context, I have a series of questions, and I think there'll be some interchange and exchange, and certainly we've got some questions on the Skype as well. But I'd like to start with Dr. Hargrove from the Center for Environmental Resource Management. Dr. Hargrove, one of the questions, I think, that does have an impact and a challenge for the U.S.-Mexico border is the ecological conditions and the environment, the way that we currently exist. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit and maybe give us some insight in, especially in terms of how regional alliances, how you've seen those change the scope of border protection, in particular in light of changes over the last several years on the Mexican side of these environmental issues with increased regulations and rules that have been established in Mexico.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Well, I think Congressman O'Rourke mentioned in the last session that really the environment doesn't recognize all of these political and boundaries and different jurisdictions that we have in our area. Just in our immediate region here in the Paso del Norte region, it's not only 2 countries, U.S. and Mexico, but 2 states in the United States and 1 state in Chihuahua, and then a whole range of local government agencies and jurisdictions as well. We're really challenged in this area because we live in the desert. We have challenges of temperature extremes, both hot and cold. We have challenges of water issues, most of the time not enough, sometimes too much, and flooding, and a lot of the time water quality issues caused both by natural causes. So we have a lot of salt and other elements like arsenic, uranium, and other constituents in our water, and some caused by human activity as well. And we're also challenged by poor air quality. Again, this was mentioned in the session before, especially at the border crossings where there's really high traffic loads. So we have a number of challenges to deal with, and there's a whole framework of rules, regulations, treaties, compacts, but I think we're still challenged to cooperate, to collaborate across the border, to cooperate amongst these different jurisdictions to really achieve the management of air and water for the sustainability of our region. And it's really, again, I think someone else mentioned in an earlier discussion today about how important the basic environment and especially water is as an underpinning to our economic activities. So I just wanted to maybe identify a couple of examples of good models that I think we're talking about. What can the rest of North America or even the world learn from the border region? And I'll just mention 2. I could mention several, but in the interest of time, I'll just name 2. One, in terms of air quality, we have the Joint Advisory Committee for the Improvement of Air Quality in the Paso del Norte region. This is a group of government agencies, including the federal government on the U.S. side, U.S. EPA, on the Mexico side, SEMARNAT, plus state agencies, local government agencies, and the private sector as well, non-government organizations, and they are even engaged the public. And this group, they try to address air quality issues in our area, talk about the problems, talk about solutions for the problems, and it's really the only body of its kind along the entire U.S.-Mexico border, and it's based right here in our Paso del Norte region. So it's really considered a model for binational cooperation at the local and regional level, especially on air quality issues. Another one that I'll mention is the Paso del Norte Watershed Council. This is a group who works to address watershed issues in the Rio Grande Basin, especially in our section of the Rio Grande, from Elephant Butte Reservoir down to the confluence of the Rio Conchos at Presidio, Texas. And this group also, they work to promote projects to improve water quality, ecosystem services, quality of life, and the overall economic sustainability of the area. So this is also an excellent forum for exchanging information, for talking about the problems, for addressing problems. Recently, they've been working on trying to address issues with coliform bacteria that is in the river. And again, it represents excellent cooperation and collaboration from the federal agencies on the Mexico side and the United States, and state agencies and even local agencies like the city of El Paso and Las Cruces.
Great. So the next question is for Mr. Herford, President of the Border Trade Alliance. We're now 20 years into the NAFTA agreement, and certainly some of the things Dr. Hargrove has spoken about, the challenges, and back to the idea of both promise and peril, we've certainly seen. But the question I think for you, and I think the question to think about what North America has learned is this notion of how regional cooperation has dealt with infrastructure issues. Certainly the impact on I-35, the movement of the kind of traffic that's happened. I'm wondering if you can share with us from your perspective where you've seen regional cooperation address some of those issues.
Sure, absolutely. You know, our organization spans from San Diego, California, and San Ysidro, California. We have a lot of friends from out there all the way down to Brownsville. I know the mayor of Laredo's here, the mayor of Presidio are here. We've worked very closely with a lot of these communities that are members of our organization to help push legislative initiatives in Washington, D.C. and in Austin. And so when you talk about regional collaboration, most border communities recognize, and the problem in Washington, D.C., when you look at US DOT maps, is it starts at the border and it only goes north. But when you're that local elected official, you're the county judge, you have to deal with the Mexican side as well, because things are being produced on the Mexican side, components, they're shipped to the US side, where we assemble some things and then we send it back. And so a product goes back and forth over the border 4 or 5 times. So we have to have that regional collaboration. And I think as an organization that's been around for 30 years, we've been very successful in a lot of our endeavors. Here recently, you heard the Congressman talking about Section 560 and Section 559 public-private partnerships. That was one of our big initiatives, thanks in large part to our advocates in Congress. I mean, Senator Cornyn played a huge role for us. Congressman O'Rourke, Congressman Cuellar, and now Congressman Hurd. And so those legislative initiatives that we take to them, they run with it, and they've delivered for the border region. So, of course, border communities have to work together, but we need to get Washington and Mexico City to pay more attention to the border, and that's what we do as an organization. And by the way, I'd like to give Orlando a plug. He's on our board as well.
The next question for Dr. Kathy Stout. Dr. Stout and I exchanged an email earlier this week talking a little bit about this notion of lessons learned, but in some ways, Dr. Stout, I think, has a unique perspective on the lessons that might actually need to be learned on the U.S.-Mexico border, in particular from our European allies and some of the border relations in Europe. So I'm wondering if flipping the question just a little bit for you, Kathy, what is it that the U.S.-Mexico border can learn from what we've seen in Europe?
Thanks, Richard. I think that we can learn a lot from Europe, a place where countries were at war 50 years ago or more and now are cooperating, I think, far more than we are at the US-Mexico border, despite some of the wonderful things that have been said so far. Why is that? There is a larger perspective, what we might call a North American perspective, and what there is called a European perspective, to try to invest in the border, to create Euro regions, to actually facilitate not only government organizations working together, but also non-government organizations working together. And I think that we can learn from that. One of the borders that I've paid special attention to is the border between Germany and Poland, once enemies, and now a place where there are bridges, no barriers, people crossing back and forth. It was once an area where there was a 10-to-1 differential in wages, and that has been reduced to a 3-to-1 differential in wages because of investments in infrastructure, because of policy attention to reducing inequalities. I think one of the troubling things that I learned from teaching border studies is that when the hundreds of borders around the world are compared, we end up being, here at the US-Mexico border, the 17th most unequal border in the entire world. And I think something needs to change with that. You know, when you have wages on one side, minimum wages that are $4 or $5 a day, and a weekly wage might be what a U.S. worker earns on this side, I think you don't have a long-term strategy for prosperity for all people in the region. So I think we can learn from our neighbors in other parts of the world, take a North American perspective, and really think seriously about working people on both sides of the border, especially working people in Ciudad Juarez, where about half of the population lives below what Mexico calls the poverty line.
Rolando Pablos, president of the Border Plex Alliance. Two-part question for you. The first part is actually a request that you describe a little bit about what the Border Plex Alliance does, because I think that certainly from the earlier session, the reference to you all I think is pretty consistent. But if you would do that, and then I've got a second question that plugs into that.
Sure. Thank you. And you know, before I answer that, I want to thank and congratulate Congressman O'Rourke and Dr. Natalicia. This has been a great day today, and so I wanted to thank them and their respective staffs for having us here today. The Border Plex Alliance grew out of an effort from the city of El Paso where an economist, a consultant came in and basically had some very harsh criticism about the economic development situation in El Paso. And he made certain recommendations, one of them being that the private sector come together to create an organization to promote economic development at the regional level. And so that's how the Border Plex Alliance started. We're 2.5 years into the efforts that we've been involved with. Really, our effort here is to help promote this area that we know as Paso del Norte, Ciudad Juarez, El Paso, Las Cruces, to help promote it as one. The recommendation by Dr. Fazer was to bring the community together to try to erase these political boundaries from an economic development perspective, to work, act, and promote ourselves as one. You know, we're 3 states, we're 2 nations, but everybody here knows that we're one economy. We're interdependent. And so what the Border Plex Alliance strives to do every day is to get the word out to the rest of the world that we are a unified community, that we're working together. We do have shared challenges, but we also have some common opportunities that we need to work together. And so eliminating some of the silos that had previously existed that Dr. Fazer identified is really what we do on a daily basis.
So the question then is, based on your answer, and I think the developing research on policy along the U.S.-Mexico border, it's clear that the public sector by itself can't generate positive change. The private sector, I think, has some of those issues. So I'm wondering if you could isolate for us perhaps the best lesson learned thus far from your experience with the Border Plex. What element of the partnership do you think is crucial, and can that be replicated, for example, in our relationships with Canada or even larger relationships in Latin America?
Well, to a certain extent, we're in uncharted territory. You know, we've got a situation where we've got 3 states, we've got 2 nations, we've got political boundaries, we have leadership on all of these sides that have their own objectives, their own goals for their respective communities. And so what we've done is we've really taken a public-private partnership approach. We work very closely with the city of El Paso, City Council of El Paso, very progressive, extremely business-friendly. We worked with all 3 mayors, Las Cruces, El Paso, and Ciudad Juarez. Mayor Leeser has taken a very proactive approach to go out and tout the region, talk about El Paso, talk about the wonderful things that are here. And so I think that the model is working, the model of collaborating with the public sector. The fact that we're private sector funded makes us more nimble. It allows us to make quick decisions, but all the while knowing that we need to collaborate, cooperate, and coordinate with the public sector. You know, a few months ago, we had all 3 mayors in Washington, D.C. travel together. We had Mayor Miyagishima, Mayor Serrano, and Mayor Leeser in Washington, D.C. Promoting this region. And so that's exactly, if I were to tell you what success looks like, it's exactly that, is having the leadership of this region go out and talk about all the wonderful things, at the same time recognizing the shared challenges and working together. And we've put together a regional strategy. We've got some recommendations that involves, you know, developing a regional plan so that we can address those challenges, as you mentioned, Doctor. So that's really the lesson learned there.
Bill.
Can I follow up on something that Kathy was
Absolutely.
talking about? Yes. And I certainly don't disagree about the unequal nature of our border in terms of socioeconomic conditions. But in terms of environmental issues and especially water management, one of the things, especially compared to Europe, the European Union tends to take a much more top-down, heavy-handed approach to water management, which we do not have in this country, and we really don't have so much in the border region. And so actually I was just in France a few weeks ago, and they have rivers, for example, in Europe. The Danube River, I think, goes through about 7 or 8 different countries. So it's a huge challenge for them to have any kind of collaboration across 7 or 8 countries on how to manage the Danube River. So actually they were quite interested and fascinated with what we do on the Rio Grande. And I'll admit we don't do it perfectly. There's a lot still that we could do better. But I think through the collaborations that we have and through agencies like IBWC on the US side and SELA on the Mexico side and many other examples as well, I think we have something, a model that others can learn from, especially in terms of transboundary water management.
Jesse, please.
Yeah, Richard, I just wanted to make a note. You started off the questioning by talking about NAFTA. One of the side deals to NAFTA was the creation of NAD Bank and BEC, the Border Environmental Cooperative Commission, which is based here in Juarez, and I know they're merging. But they've done a tremendous job in funding water and wastewater treatment plants along the border on the Mexican side to try to clean up the Rio Grande. And I think the stat is something like 92%. They've been able to reduce pollution by 92% with all of those projects that they funded. So we do have some success stories. How many water treatment plants can you really fund? And so now they're looking at funding others, such as infrastructure for ports of entry to help with the air emission issues. So as we talk about environment, I thought I'd just highlight that. And Alex Hinojosa, the Deputy Director of the bank, is here with us as well.
Let me ask a question driven a little bit by one of the tweets from, I think, the audience. At Sludgebuster, this is for you, Dr. Stout. At Sludgebuster asks, how can trade be fair to women? And I want to add an element to that question, I think, specifically for you, given your experience looking not only at questions of social justice and immigration, but also to get to the heart of this question, is the unfairness or the disadvantage in terms of gender a terminal problem for trade? Is this unique to the border region? Do you see there being a solution anytime in the future?
Well, certainly, besides the inequalities between both sides of the border, there are a lot of internal inequalities on each side of the border, within El Paso, within Ciudad Juarez. The wage situation on gender is nationally about 77%, women making 77% of what men do. But here in El Paso, the figures are much more disturbing when you break that down by ethnicity and gender. And the most recent figures I saw show that Hispanic women earn about 37% of what white men earn. And that's an extremely troubling statistic, especially when there are women who are heading households, raising children, and then having to do it on a really, really low salary that is so small compared to the salary of some. I look forward to the day when there can be value paid for labor and skill rather than based on some of these demographic characteristics like gender and ethnicity, which still seems to drive so much of how people value labor. And if I could add something that augments some of the comments that have just been made, while we might have some good institutions relating to the environment, and we have good public cooperation. We have 3 mayors who are interacting with one another. We have federal commissions. But when it comes to the non-government organization sector, and yes, we may have advantages compared to Europe, Bill, We, both in Mexico and the United States, we have strong NGO sectors and social movement organizations, but I don't think anyone has talked yet today about the barrier that the border poses for people being able to cooperate across the border line. And I wonder if, I love maps, as some of my former students know. And, well, this is my first map, the border, my border, the center of the world. You know, just a great central location for so much good interaction and activity. But the next one shows how close both of these cities are together. The map on the right is from the El Paso Planning Department, and it shows how literally these two cities are hugging one another. We share so many common interests. Interest in water quality, interest in air quality, interest in reducing pollution, which has effects on people's health at the border. And in order to be able to keep those public institutions on their toes, we need strong civil society organizations. We need strong NGOs. And for people to be able to work on their common interests on both sides of the border, I want you to just imagine what it means when you're not a preferred traveler and you haven't paid your hundreds of dollars to be able to get, you know, special vehicle qualifications to pass quickly on the border, and you're waiting in a line for 1, 2, or 3 hours to be able to meet with your colleagues on the other side of the border in a non-government organization. Literally, what might be a 1-hour meeting on one side of the border turns into a 3 or 4 hour project for people to be able to work together. And as a political scientist, I have a strong interest in small d democracy. And so I'd like to see a way in which people in non-government organizations, in civil society, can more easily and quickly interact with one another. And of course, some of that can happen through the internet and emails and so on. But face-to-face meetings to develop strong and deep personal relationships, that's what a lot of NGO organizing is about. And we have challenges facing us with this heavily secured border and the inability to cross quickly.
So let me actually follow that particular comment up, because I've got a question, I think, for both Mr. Herford and Mr. Pablos. You know, clearly the reaction to the nativist sentiment seems to be running strong in the United States right now. Tonight, the Republicans will have their first presidential debate. Candidate Donald Trump has talked about building a fence between the United States and Mexico that hypothetically would be impenetrable. The arguments about immigration certainly have taken a social justice theme, but a question that I have for you, especially in terms of where we can lead on this issue, can trade and business be part of the argument that challenges that nativist sentiment, right? I mean, the offense that is hypothetically impenetrable has potential negative impacts on trade and local cooperative efforts. Is it possible that business becomes kind of the pivot to make these answers to the nativist claims?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is to try to refute some of this negativity that's out there. And so what we're doing is we're actually trying to educate folks outside of this region, trying to ask them to come down here. You know, we had Senator Cornyn down here last year. He was down here. As a result of that, we've hosted over 100 visitors from Washington in cooperation with the U.S. Consul in Ciudad Juarez to try to educate them, to have them come down and see. And so once they come down and they look at reality, they see what we really are, you know, you very quickly see in them a change in attitude, a change in perception. And so I think it takes educating some of these individuals with all the negative rhetoric and really using real figures, data, numbers. The fact that, you know, for some of these representatives, members of Congress, the fact that some of their constituents depend on what's going on in the border from an economic perspective, they don't really understand that. And so you have to help connect the dots. And, you know, bringing folks down here, showing them the reality of things, I think has been very helpful. But as you know, that's very time consuming, it's expensive. But I think we need to really embark on a concerted effort border-wide, all the way from Brownsville to San Isidro and San Diego, to make sure that we all work together to try to educate and change that, that negativity that's out there. So I think if you do that, you target corporate America, you target federal officials, and you target the media in trying to educate them with real facts and figures, that will definitely be a good detonation point.
Let's get to Jesse and then we'll go back to...
And just to expand on what Rolando said, I mean, what we try to do as an organization is make it an economic argument. So by making an economic argument, you're diffusing the emotion in this. So what are some of the facts that we highlight? We highlight 6 million jobs that are tied to trade with Mexico. We talk about Laredo specifically, 12,000 trucks cross at the World Trade International Bridge, you know, in each direction on a daily basis. I mean, we have $1.3 billion that crosses the US-Mexico border every day. I mean, so it is an economic engine, and what gets lost in Washington, as Rolando rightfully pointed out, and as Congressman O'Rourke and Congressman Hurd, is the rhetoric and the Donald Trumps of the world wanting to build these fences. You know, the last time the U.S. government went and built border fences, we invested so much in the border fences, and we didn't focus on where we should have focused our resources on, and that's the ports of entry. Because as Commissioner Kurlikowski also pointed out, you know, every CBP officer is a profit to the economy, and why is that? Because they're moving goods through in a fast, efficient, and safe manner.
So, Bill, I don't want to jump you, but Kathy wanted to get in, so do you mind ceding that time, and then we'll get right back to you after that? Perfect.
I just wanted to applaud the efforts of bringing more people here to the border, but I would like to add that we might need to bring people from the Texas legislature and the executive branch to the border as well. Yeah. We have not only the past governor, but the current governor taking on responsibilities that will burden Texas taxpayers for federal responsibilities. And every time there's an election campaign, I hear those two words, border security, border security. And the last legislative session passed a bill into law that will spend almost $1 billion on more border security. Then as soon as the election is over, as soon as the budget making process is over, well, then there's someone who goes from the Secretary of State's office to Mexico City to make a visit. We don't have anything in Texas like what we heard and saw on the last panel, and that is a governor who really pays attention to building relationships at the border. And I think you saw from her comments that this is not really a partisan issue. The border is not a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be an issue of helping to build prosperity at our borderlands, both sides of the border. And we don't get much support for that in the state of Texas.
Bill.
So I wanted to speak just a moment to the future and some opportunities for the future, because Kathy is right in that there are real challenges in terms of, just for example, the city of El Paso working closely with Ciudad Juarez. At the same time, both cities recently received grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, each one of about $1 million each, to the city of El Paso and to Ciudad Juarez to help them develop plans for resilience in the city. And this represents a huge opportunity and a very unique and innovative opportunity for two twin cities that are on an international border to try to work together to build resilience for the entire area. And especially thinking now, I'm thinking more about resilience includes many things, but I'm thinking just a moment now about the environmental and especially the water issues. This would be a huge opportunity for direct collaboration and cooperation between the city of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez to address water issues, air issues, and all kinds of other issues that impact the resilience of our cities. And this would be really unique in the entire world. Rockefeller has given now about 50 or 60 of these grants and are about to do another 30 or so that they have a total of 100 resilient cities all around the world. And Juarez, El Paso, is the only twin city on an international border that has these grants. So we could really become a model and show the rest of the world how to do this. So it's a huge opportunity. One other thing for the future that I see, you were talking about infrastructure and infrastructure challenges, especially, again, I'm thinking about water and wastewater treatment infrastructure, sanitation infrastructure. This has been a problem on the border for many years now, especially in colonias along the border, on both sides of the border. But I also see even a new opportunity and hope in this. I see the city of El Paso, for example, I've learned is developing a plan right now to working with partners and through some of their own resources and also working with partners, is developing a long-range plan that would provide water to every colonia in El Paso County. And I think this is a huge development that, before now was not thought about or was not even possible. For a long time, the Public Service Board had as their main guidelines that they would only serve customers within the city limits of El Paso. And that has changed. And now they're, like I said, developing a long-range plan where every colonia in El Paso County would have access to piped water. I see also the mayor of Presidio, Texas is sitting here on the front row, and the chief economic development officer. They're also looking into ways where the city of Presidio can extend water out to some colonias in their area. And they're just a small city of what, 5,000 people? 5,000 people. So I see this happening along the border where there's cooperation and trying to extend services and improve not just within the city limits, but in the entire county and rural areas as well.
Mr. Herford, a question again about trade, and in particular asking, I think, a little bit of a prediction. Certainly one thing that I think border residents have seen, and I think we're seeing as part of the economic changes, the development of the maquilas in the trade industry that had been so significant and consistent for so long on the border has shifted. Certainly now as markets are opening up in China, the development of factory cities and factory development. So I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a prediction if you see adjustments or modifications to the kinds of industries that we'll see on the border, or if there is going to be a need to have sort of a soul-searching moment about the kind of trade that occurs along U.S.-Mexico border.
No, that's a great question. I mean, right now the top 3 industries in Mexico for manufacturing are automotive, high tech, and now aerospace has really taken off in the Bajío area. So as price of oil, if that ever comes back up, we're going to see a lot of international trade and crossings with oil from the Eagle Ford Shale folks going over into the basins, especially in the Coahuila and Tamaulipas area, to explore. As I think I did a study, we did a feasibility study with the company that I work for a new port of entry, and some of the things we looked at was that exactly. By 2025, Mexico is supposed to grow from the 7th largest light car manufacturer to the 5th. So we know automotive is going to continue to increase. We heard on the previous panel how many cars are being manufactured in Mexico and sold in the United States. So as these, some of our ports of entry are 40 years old or older. And so we don't have sufficient infrastructure. When you look at a port of entry, there's 3 issues at a port of entry, or one of each or a combination of the 3 issues. You have a lack of infrastructure, so you don't have enough lanes, you don't have enough inspection booths, you don't have a large enough secondary. Secondly, you don't have enough personnel to be waving things through. Or third is the processes that both aduanas on the Mexican side and CBP on the US side are taking too long to inspect. So those are the issues we have today currently. So when you start looking at 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the future, I mean, TxDOT is doing a freight mobility plan that puts us at 2055. I mean, international trade is supposed to triple by then. So if we don't start moving these projects, and as somebody in the infrastructure business, these projects take anywhere from 10 to 15 years to do. We're really going to be hurting, and it goes back to the professors here at UTEP. I mean, the environment's going to get worse. There's going to be more pollutants in the air. We're not going to have enough water. So these are all things that we need to take into consideration. Now there's talks of signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what does that do? It's opening up new markets. I mean, we have issues at LA Long Beach because of the unions there. So now what a lot of the shippers in Asia are doing are shipping it into Mexico and the west coast of Mexico, and then trucking it or shipping it by rail to the Texas border and then up through the rest of the country. So if we don't get our infrastructure plans and projects in place now, we're really going to be behind the 8 ball as international trade continues to expand.
We have a Twitter question from our MC, at Bob Moore News. And I think this question is really best addressed by Mr. Pablos and by Dr. Stout. The question that Bob has is, what can the rest of North America learn from the border on intercultural dialogue and relationships?
Well, I, for one, having lived here at the border for over 35 years, just relish and feel blessed every day by the opportunity to live in a multicultural, bilingual, international kind of environment. I have students in my classes who are from the region and also from Mexico, and they have skill sets that people in other parts of the country would die for. They're bilingual, they know how to navigate borders, they know how to deal in multiple currencies. They are truly prepared for the 21st century. So I think that the rest of the country needs to know that we're already doing things that you all need to learn in the next few decades. So look at us, learn from us, because we are moving toward the 21st century with skill sets and languages that the rest of you need to start developing soon.
And Bob, I think tolerance is really the first term that comes to mind. You know, as someone who grew up in Ciudad Juarez and in El Paso, you know, it's not just about being bilingual, but it's about being bicultural and being binational. And so, you know, as the rest of the nation looks down here and tries to understand who we are and what we're doing, I think really, you know, taking a step and really becoming aware of what that means. You know, what does it mean to be bicultural, understanding those nuances, those differences. And here, you know, we're used to it, but, you know, once you go north or even if you go south, then it starts getting a little hazy. And so it goes back to what I said earlier in going out, spreading the word, educating. You know, I think the Wilson Center is doing a great job in that. The Wilson Center is out there talking about that, trying to bring us together at that level. And so, you know, tolerance, I think, would be, you know, probably the first step.
Yes, and relating this also again to resilience, and the city of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez working on a plan for resilience. I think one big cultural advantage that we have here in this border region is the strong family and neighborhood ties and connections that we have. We haven't figured out maybe yet how to capitalize on that in terms of building resilience within our city. But I think it's something that is definitely unique. It's definitely an asset, and we need to figure out how to harness that to build this resilience. Because in many other places and in other cities where they don't have that, people are dependent on basically government services to build resilience. But I think we have a lot of internal capacity here because of these strong family and neighborhood ties that we have. If we can just figure out how to harness that.
We have another Twitter question from the audience. At J Chavez Border asks, I think this is a great question for Mr. Herford, Mr. Pablos. The question is, what would it take for Juarez to go into an economic renaissance like El Paso currently finds itself in?
I'll address that. It's already in an economic renaissance. I mean, Juarez added 13,000 jobs last year. Mayor Serrano has been very aggressive in his economic development strategy. Granted, you know, there are challenges with respect to infrastructure. Workforce is a challenge. You know, right now you've got so much growth from some of these companies that are over there that, you know, workforce is being stretched. We were in Detroit with Mayor Serrano and Mayor Leeser last year and speaking with CEOs of companies that are already invested here. Every single one of them talked about expansion plans. We're talking to the tune of almost $1 billion of expansion. And so Ciudad Juarez is back in my mind. And Ciudad Juarez, you know, I think, you know, just needs to work on ridding itself of this reputation that it's developed that at this point is unfair and unwarranted, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we turn that trend around.
You know, as an organization that represents both communities and private sector businesses, both on the northern and southern border, you know, I leave the local economic development to the local folks like Rolando, who's done a tremendous job here at the border Plex. So I really don't have anything to add other than I know that the city has been very aggressive in addressing the staffing issues, and that's why they're part of Section 516, Section 559. They're giving money to the federal government to have more agents on certain hours to help expedite trade and travel at our ports of entry. So I know that the city of El Paso has really stepped up financially to try to help with some of these issues as wait times at the ports of entry.
Dr. Stout, a question for you back to the topic of immigration, and in particular, when we talk about immigration and both the nativist sentiment and the practical issues on the ground on the border, there certainly is a number of comparisons to what happens on the southern border of Mexico in terms of treatment of immigrants and the flow of immigrants as they cross with the intent of coming to the United States. Are there lessons you think that have been learned on the US-Mexico border that might be beneficial in terms of how immigration is handled on the southern Mexico border? Or is it possible that even a conversation about how we talk about immigration might be valuable along those two separate sets of borders?
When we talk about immigration from Central America, I think we do have to recognize that the roots of many of the problems that drive Central Americans northward have to do with what was happening during the 1980s, with civil wars, with alignments that took place with governments that were not there to serve their people, with the guns that were left behind, and just the tremendous violence that now exists in Central American countries. And so when people are moving northward, they are now encountering some of the same obstacles in southern Mexico with a US-funded Frontera Sur program, as far as I know, that make life more and more difficult for them in their journeys northward, despite all the risks that they're taking. Lessons learned, I mean, lessons for whom? Because I think some of the migrants who are moving northward are coming for economic opportunities and jobs, and I'm certainly with some of the panelists in conversation number 2, which would say we need to find a way for people to either work here or work for a while and go back. We need a common sense approach to immigration reform, and I don't see that happening now, and I wish the business community would step up to the plate a bit more on immigration reform and find a way that is humane, that responds to people who are fleeing terrible situations, and finds a way for them to be safe and secure and earn a living for people who are often very, very willing to work.
So we have just a few minutes left. One question, if I could get each person's quick thought and quick response. The biggest challenge that we face along the US-Mexico border in the next 5 years. Mr. Pablos.
Well, we're already doing a good job with U.S.-Mexico relations. On both sides of the border, I think we just need to focus on cooperation, collaboration, and most importantly, in coordination, having a regional vision, a regional mindset. I think that's it. And I'm talking about the border itself, and then within our region, within this border Plex region, coming together as 3 states and 2 nations and one single economy. I think that's the challenge, but I think we can overcome it.
I would say it's infrastructure and staffing. When you look at what CBP does, CBP takes they have the staffing model that they use, always looks at historical data and isn't forward-looking, isn't looking at the increases in certain industries and where they're crossing, or the increases in tourism. And I think that that's an issue that we have, and that's an issue that we'll continue to focus on. I also think in the redesigning of ports of entry, we have issues to ensure that businesses that are already there, that are site-specific, need to stay there. And those are some of the issues that we've seen along some of the border.
I still think water resources is a big challenge. I know El Paso Water Utilities and also Ciudad Juarez have good solid plans for supplying sufficient water for our area for the next 20 to 50 years. But I think the unknown, or maybe the risk, is how the climate, what the climate scenario is going to be for the coming years. We have maybe a temporary reprieve right now because of all the rain that we've had in Texas. But I think when the drought continues and the flow in the Rio Grande is reduced again, I think we're going to be challenged. And I think this is something that we have to continue to work on.
I think our challenges involve deepening democracy at the border, both sides of the border, building strong institutions that will create accountable law enforcement institutions on both sides of the border. I think we need to focus on fair trade, not just free trade, and make sure that the wages, especially on the Mexico side of the border, go up. Although I applaud and welcome visitors to the border from Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas, and so on, I do believe that more people in Austin and Washington, D.C. and Mexico City need to hear border voices. They need to hear from people who live here and who can communicate what's going on at the border.
Before I turn the events back over to Bob Moore, join me in thanking Professor Bill Hargrove, Mr. Jesse Herford, Professor Kathy Stout, and Mr. Rolando Pablos.
Thank you, Dr. Pineda, and thanks to all of our panelists. There's a reception outside, give you a chance to mingle with each other and also probably talk to some of the panelists we've had today. A little bit of food out there, and then we also will hear from a couple of our regional mayors. So please join me outside.
Thanks, man.
Good job.
Appreciate
Good
it.
job. Yep.
Doing okay?
Yeah, doing great.
Good. Good to see you.